What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Top 5 players I overhyped last season. I've done this video each of the past 2 years, I think, only about 2 years. And I think it's an important one because we learn so much more from our mistakes than we do when we get things right, because it forces us to reevaluate, to go back and say, why did this work out so poorly? Was it random luck, or was it a process mistake that we made? Now, this video is going to go over the mistakes, of course. So if, say, McCaffrey tears his ACL in week 10, well, obviously we can't count that because he was clearly still a good pick, and there would be nothing for us to learn from that, right? It's just a random injury, still a good pick. So these are players I overhyped from a process standpoint, not from result standpoint, although the results are still going to be bad, of course, because these guys busted. I want to keep in mind always process over results. We improve the process, the results will be there more often than not. So there's going to be like 3 stages of players. I say top 5, it's actually top 6 technically. But it's 3 groupings, 3 things I guess we got wrong. And the first grouping is the first 2 players was not avoiding risk in the early rounds. And the first one up is David Johnson. I think by the end of August, his ADP was in that like 4 to 7 range. I think it depended on like your league settings and stuff. But it was around like the mid-first round. And this is a situation where I definitely wish I had the risk grades that I made this season, because his grade wouldn't have been all that different than it is right now, especially since he would have gotten that extra ding for having a new quarterback and being in a new system. So there's no way I would have suggested taking someone with as high of a risk grade as he currently has right now in the middle of the first round. Remember how much I preach safety in the first 4 rounds. After that, as soon as we hit round 5, we're shooting for upside with every pick, and we're honestly getting more and more risky as the draft moves on. But the first 4 rounds, you got to be 100% sure in your picks. Right now, of the people I have rated in the top 10 for running backs, only Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake have as high of risk grades. They're not as high as David Johnson's, of course, but relatively high risk grades for those 2. So maybe I need to look at them a little bit, but they're also going in like the second round. It's a little bit different than going in the mid-first. But back to Johnson. While not injury prone, I hate using that term, he has elevated injury risk, at least higher than other running backs. He had a new quarterback, new offensive system. He was 27, which I do assign some risk to in the formula. And the offense, while it was going to be good, was clearly not expected to be a tier 1 offense. And so looking at all of that, there's no way his grade would have been as low as some of these other first-round running backs, so we should not have been targeting him as heavily as we were. The next player who fits the same thing is Odell, right? He was going in like that early to mid-second round, kind of depends on league size, but roughly in that range, despite changing teams, which is a huge red flag for wide receivers, changing teams in the offseason, not being injury-prone, like I say, but having elevated injury risk. So for an early second-round pick, that's just not worth it. Because think about it, he's also a wide receiver, right? Like maybe if you had a running back changing teams who had this crazy upside, maybe you take that in the early second round. But it's a wide receiver. Why are we taking any chances at wide receiver in the early rounds? 25 wide receivers had at least 1,000 receiving yards last season, and that's even with Devonta Adams having 997 because of his injury. That's up from 18 in 2018, 13 in 2017, and I looked back through 2002. The next most was 23. So with it being under 20 most seasons. So wide receiver right now is as deep as it ever has been, and we just had one of the deepest wide receiver classes in recent years. So taking a risky wide receiver in the second round is just dumb. So that was a mistake on my part for sure. Looking at this season, only Julio has a decently high risk grade in the first 2 rounds. I'm not too concerned about that though, because we know while Julio's healthy, he's going to get just an insane amount of targets, and the risk grade isn't really that high. It's not something to worry about for Julio. Of course, as the age is getting up there, but I mean, the targets are going to Julio. It's just worth noting, I haven't taken him in any mock drafts, and every time we do these mock drafts where we look at the comparisons at the end, you guys are always saying, get the running back. We like the team with the early running back more. So very interesting to note. Really should be targeting running backs and not wide receivers, and especially so, don't be targeting risky wide receivers early. Moving on, we've got low ADOT receivers, and this is not just the early rounds, this is every single round, and I guess you'd almost look at it more in the later rounds. So last season, I made the mistake of trusting a few low ADOT receivers, especially ones who are not established receiving threats and are not on good offenses. So if you look at guys like Michael Thomas, like Cooper Kupp, they got extremely low ADOTs, right? And if you don't know ADOT, it's average depth of target. So every time they get the ball, on average, how deep is that downfield? Well, yeah, Michael Thomas and Cooper Kupp have very low depths of target, but they're on very, very good offenses, and we know that they're good receivers, they're established threats, we know they're going to be good. But I liked Dede, Westbrook, and at least for part of the summer, DaeSean Hamilton, but these guys had no upside because of where their routes are, and because of how bad we knew their offenses were going to be. So there's no way Dede should have been going in the 6th round, especially since we know he was going to have a quarterback change, maybe multiple throughout the season. I mean, we knew at least he was going to have the one because he didn't have Nick Foles before. So at the very worst, he's got a new quarterback on a pretty bad team with a low ADOT. Actually, no, that's not the very worst. That's like the best case scenario for him. And then the worst case happened, which he gets all these quarterback changes. And it's just a mess. So when you look at these receivers, their upside is not good. And if we're shooting for upside as soon as we hit the 5th round, why are we taking guys who don't have anything? And then for Hamilton, he was going super late, so maybe we liked all the targets. But even if you imagine he gets like 7 or 8 targets a week, these targets are so close to the line of scrimmage, he's not going to have many touchdowns. He's not going to have many big plays. He's going to have a lot of weeks where he has like 4 for 50. And that's just not even worth owning in fantasy. So moving forward, we need to consider all of the range of outcomes for sure, but we need to consider the high end much more than we consider the low end. I'm not too concerned if my 6th or 7th round pick gets injured or has a terrible season if, to make up for that risk, I'm getting wide receiver 1 upside. And these guys just didn't have that, and so we shouldn't have been targeting them. Final mistake is with late round running backs. And so this is less about like saying, oh, you just can't draft a late round running back. No, you still can, and you're probably going to take at least one. But every year I talk about the RB0 strategy and how much upside you can get in a full PPR league if you hit on a running back late, if you find one in free agency, you trade for one at some point, because, in RB0, you're taking maybe tight ends early, you're taking all these wide receivers early, the rest of your team is really solid, so if you get lucky late, and if you pick someone up on free agency, your team can be really good. But every season, you have these opportunities, and I think people get confused with me saying it's a great strategy with it if it works, with it's always going to work. It's not easy. I think people think picking a late round running back is just the easiest thing in the world. There's all these upside picks, and that means a ton of guys are going to hit. Here's a list of every single running back being taken in rounds 9 through 14 last season. Not a single running back finished as a running back 2 or better, either in points per game or over a whole season, and just 3 of the 23 being taken in that range finished as a running back 3 or better. So no matter who you took in rounds 9 through 14 last season, which is typically just the end of the draft, you take like a defense in the 15th, your best possible outcomes were Jordan Howard, Kareem Hunt, who you knew you were going to miss 9 weeks with at a minimum because of suspension for the first 8 plus his bye, Ronald Jones, Carlos Hyde, and Adrian Peterson, of which only Hunt was on more than 10% of championship teams. He was on 12%. So no matter who you drafted at the running back position after round 8, you were wrong. And if you look at 2018, it's pretty similar. Only James White and Nick Chubb ended up being really good picks. And so realistically, you think back to that season, you're like, well, Nick Chubb was great, wasn't as good as last year, and most people dropped him anyways because he only had 2.5 carries before week 7, 2.5 carries a game before week 7. And so I'm not saying exactly what the strategy should be in the late rounds for running backs, but I definitely think I need to do a better job at explaining to you how unlikely you are to hit at the running back position in the later rounds, because your chances of hitting are really bad. It could happen, but incredibly low chance. So I was hyping up Damian Harris and Justice Hill as great late round targets because they did have a ton of upside if things went right. And I don't think that they necessarily were bad picks, but hyping up these late round running backs as just game changers, as guys who can win you your leagues, yes, they can. But if we think about it, it's such a low likelihood chance. Why not just save the later round picks for players in positions who already do have roles? Like, instead of taking OJ Howard in the 5th round last season, we'll just shift your tight end pick to Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, Mike Gesicki, who have the exact same roles and are free in the later rounds. Obviously, we're talking about last year, not this year, because those guys are going a little bit earlier besides Gesicki. But just think about that. You have almost no chance of hitting at the running back position late unless you're taking a handcuff for someone that you have. Why not save that for a quarterback, tight end, defense, a wide receiver? There's 4. Because we know who the good running backs are, right? We know exactly who they are. So take them when they're available in the draft, early and middle. Save the later rounds for like one handcuff and then just finish out wide receiver, take your quarterback, tight end, and take your defense. So that's just my take on the running backs. Again, I don't think that necessarily specifically hyping up Damian Harris and Justice Hill were necessarily bad, but hyping it up as you got to take these just home run shots at the running back position probably isn't smart, because a ton of people are going to miss every single season at those positions. Let's reduce those chances. Take your running backs early. So those are some players that I overhyped last season. Remember that you can see my favorite players to target, favorite players to avoid, my risk ratings, my rankings, all at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.